Hey guys, it's me. How about maybe? And I'm here to leech off a trend, like the scum of the earth that I am, the parasite that I am on the Dead by Daylight community. And basically, I'm here to give my opinion on the question of, does Darth Vader belong in Dead by Daylight? Yeah. And in my opinion, we should look at both of the arguments first before I give my opinion to increase viewer retention. So some people in the camp of arguing Vader is in Dead by Daylight argues that, well, there's a lot of chapters that aren't necessarily horror, but you can make them horror. Like Nick Cage that's not horror within itself. Now, is it really? But he's been in horror movies, and also they relate the lore of Nicolas Cage to be horror related. So that's how they kind of made Nicolas Cage fit in Dead by Daylight. I like motorcycles. I love walking. God damn it! It's a 25 zone! Shut up! Anyway. Stop! Jesus Christ. I hate motorcyclists. We should be able to legally run over one motorcyclist per week. Alright, there's another one. God. Anyway. Like Dungeons and Dragons, Vecna is not strictly horror related, but he is kind of scary. They managed to change the lore. Vecna's not changed it. I don't know Vecna's lore if he has multiple lores or not. But the lore of Aestri, Baymar, and Vecna are all written in such a way that it is, at the very least, horror adjacent. And Dead by Daylight's moved into more properties that are horror adjacent. Like Tomb Raider. Is Star Wars horror adjacent, though? And this is where we lead into the arguments on the other side of no, they are not horror adjacent. It's an action sci-fi. Just because a bad guy is really intimidating does not mean that he's a horror villain. Another motorcycle. So like, for instance, Arthas the Lich King, he's really intimidating, but is he a horror? Is he like a horror character? I don't know. I mean, there's probably a lot of people who are scared of Darth Vader that are, like, he's a bit scary, threatening presence. Okay, let me use another example. Let's say we get Sauron in Lord of the Rings movies. Sauron is an intimidating figure. What he does is very scary. If you were to be a victim of Sauron, you'd be pretty scared. But is he a horror villain? And is the Lord of the Rings horror? I'd say Lord of the Rings is kind of horror adjacent. There are a few scenes in the movies, like Army of the Dead scene, that are kind of horror adjacent. And so Sauron got added into Dead by Daylight. I would be kind of understanding of that. So, but at the same time, that's high fantasy action movies. So, is Darth Vader, is Star Wars horror adjacent, though? I mean, kind of. It has certain aspects of horror relation. Okay. Let's look at some horror movie franchises that we have in Dead by Daylight that aren't necessarily, that maybe have started out as horror, but as time has gone on, not so much horror anymore. Like, should I? Or moved away from horror a bit more. Resident Evil started out the first few Resident Evil games, I think we can agree, from what I've seen of them anyway, because I have not played the games really. I played a bit of the first one. Were very horror focused. But now, like, when they made the switch to first-person shooters with Resident Evil Village, Resident Evil 7, and all that, that's still scary, but it's considerably less scary than the original Resident Evil games. I feel like that's something that a lot of people would agree with me on. Like, okay. Also, a lot of the original survivors, let's use Arella here, her lore is tragic, but not really horror. Her lore is not scary, exactly. And a lot of the original survivors' lore does not have this sense of foreboding dread or horror. Some do, like Felix's lore has that sense. But a lot of them don't. Dwight just gets lost in a forest, for instance. So, yeah. You may therefore say, well, those are survivors, that's different. And, yeah, you'd be kind of right, but also, Castlevania, I'm sorry to say, is not a horror game. It's not a horror franchise. But it is horror adjacent. It's an action fantasy, is what I would classify it as. It's a fighting action fantasy, I'd say. But it's not really horror. Because, well, yeah, it's a vampire. Vampires are in horror a lot. Lost Boys is a horror movie. But there is a lot of vampires who are not horror focused. Alucard from Hellsing and Hellsing Ultimate. Hellsing Ultimate is a show all about vampires, but like the Hellsing franchise is not horror related really. And JoJo's Bizarre Adventures. Dio's a vampire, but he does have this intimidating presence. But I would not say JoJo's Bizarre Adventures is a horror series, just because it has vampires. Like, is it really... Like, and yet people, is it really horror, Castlevania, if, with the gameplay it has and the story it has? Not really, and yet people really enjoyed the Castlevania chapter, so it's just that Darth Vader is not, a vampire or a lich in the way of Vecna, because when Dungeons & Dragons first came out, people were, of course, saying, like, it's not horror, it doesn't fit. And it kind of does, because Dungeons & Dragons has some horrifying creatures. Like, I think it was, Lost Hydras? I think? It was like this invisible Hydra invisible beast that just showed itself to you. And it's a Hydra, has multiple heads, and then it kills you really fast. And you don't know it's there until it's basically too late, which is horrifying. Like, if you saw Vecna in real life, you'd be scared. If you saw Darth Vader in real life, you'd be pissing your pants. So, like, you think Castlevania and Dungeons & Dragons is okay, but Star Wars isn't? Like, okay. Now I come back to... I have a bunch of discombobulated points, but that's what happens on these videos. That's just my pure thoughts. Basically, we have a lot of franchises in Dead by Daylight that aren't all horror, but they are horror adjacent and have horror adjacent elements at the very least, like Dungeons & Dragons, like Castlevania, like Tomb Raider. In that way, Darth Vader would fit in Dead by Daylight. He's very menacing, he's very scary. He does a lot of messed up stuff. And yeah, I'd say Star Wars as a franchise actually has quite a bit of horror adjacent elements to it. Like, I'm trying to think through all the movies. Shut up, cat. Okay, that one scene in the pit in Boba Fett's lair is pretty scary. Monster Fight Club. But, yeah. Oh my god, cat's meowing at me. Yeah, those are my thoughts. Does he fit in Dead by Daylight? I would say, yeah, I guess. Would he fit as well as like somebody like Jason Voorhees? No, not as well, but I think he still fits. But that's my opinion. See y'all.